Hi everybody, got a tenor ukulele that's come in for repair, and I don't know whether you can see just here, it's probably very difficult for you to see actually on the video. There's actually a bit of a rut forming in that fret, and the reason being is that the nut, if I just slip the string back on top of here so you can see, the string, can you see there's not a lot of slot there, and it's laying pretty much on top of that fret. Once that's tight, it will lay on that fret. Now the problem is that it was taken in for a setup to another luthier, and he clearly noticed that this slot had run a little bit low. Now the truth is, when this nut was manufactured, it really didn't have enough meat in the bone here. Could have done a bit more. Now what you can see he's done, you can see here that it's got a small amount of either bone dust and glue, or quite possibly some bicarbonate and glue, which actually goes incredibly hard. It's not a bad fix actually as a temporary fix for a nut with a dead slot. But because the nut itself isn't high enough, you can see that some of the material is just a little bit proud, and the slot's been kind of cut in. It's not really a proper job. It was probably a bit of an emergency job. What you really need to do is what I'm going to do today, which is take another piece of bone and cut a new one, and I'm just going to show you how to do that. Okay, the nut is now loose. I've taken it out. It's totally free. Now let me show you how I did that. Okay, first thing I did is I took a knife. This is like a scalpel blade, very sharp one, and I've actually cleared the finish along the edge here and along the edge here, because the chances are it's been finished with it in place, and what will happen is that you'll chip the finish taking it out. So along all the sides I've taken the knife and just scored that finish so that it's got a weak spot to come out. And then what I did is I just put a piece of tape across here so that I didn't scratch the fingerboard, and I took a screwdriver, and you can't see this, but I gave it basically a tap like that. Now these are in with super glue, of course that was loose, and you can see that the super glue has marked the front. Now this is a good thing, because this is the face you really want this glued on. This is not such a good thing. This is an overuse of the glue, because really the mahogany at the bottom is very fibrous, and it's always likely to have some of it come away. Now you can't help that when you take one of these out. If it's been glued here, there's nothing you can do. The best thing you can do is just clean and flatten the slot out with a file afterwards, and then of course just make sure that you've got enough material at the bottom of your nut to cope with the fact you've taken a very, very small amount of material away. Really, you want a couple of little dabs on the face here, because the surface here, which is ebony in this case, is much less resistant, it's much more resistant to fibres coming away. Okay, now this is a little bit crude as a way of doing this, but what I'm going to do, I take my gauge and I'm going to just measure that, which is, it's 5 millimeters, give or take 0.1. It's about 5 millimeters. Okay, I think you see that. It's going to be upside down for you, isn't it? But it's 5 millimeters. Take my word for it. It says 4.8 to 4.9 millimeters. And what we're going to do, we know what we've got here. We've got 6. Okay, so we're going to take a millimeter off of this with a belt sander. Now this is a pretty crude way of doing this, and it's a bit of an art rather than a science, and you're not going to get it right first time doing this at home, even if you've got a belt sander. And I didn't, but you get used to doing it, and as long as you check quite regularly what you're doing, it should be okay. And you just have to put it down by hand on the sander. Okay, now you can see it's a little bit thinner now, and I've got 4.87 at one end and I've got 4.84 at the other end. When I go back to my other one, I've got 4.79, 4.8, 4.86. That's almost exactly on, and you can see what I'm doing here is checking it both sides and just adding a little bit of pressure in either direction just to get it square, which I'm having to do a little bit by eye, which is not the best thing in the world, but we can worry about getting that dead on later if it's slightly out. Okay, next we're going to mark the slots a little bit. Okay, now that's actually just a little bit too long. I know you said it's a little bit proud there, but we're going to take that off afterwards because we can just file that down by holding the two together. And now what I'm just going to do, there you go. So that's clamped in there. Basically, all this is done with that. All I've done with that file here is just make sure that the two bottoms are flat to each other. So it just makes it easier to do. And that's in there nice and tight. And all I'm going to do is just use that now, so I can actually see the slot underneath. That slot's too low for me to actually use as a physical guide, but I'm just putting that in there like that. What I'm not going to do is to take anything away from the area around the slot just yet. I'm just going to start to use the file to take the edges off and make it nice and rounded, so that it's not uncomfortable to play. What I don't want to do is put a curvature into the slot area yet. We could do that later, but I don't think it's going to be necessary. And we saw with the original nut that that was the problem. It was actually too slanted. Now that's only coarse, but that's fine for the moment because we don't need to go too far. We are going to have to take some more off the edges anyway. It's just to take those corners off so that we can kind of find our way in and make sure that we've got the right shape. You can see we're still a little bit too wide. There's a tiny little bit there which we'll have to take off. We'll probably do that last as we get it right down to its proper width. The next thing we can do is go at the back. So I'm going to take again the coarse one, coarse file. I'm going to start to shape down towards the back, making sure not to touch the front of the nut at all. Okay, and that'll do for the moment. Next thing to do is to get it exactly to its right shape and get it onto the neck of the guitar. To get the edges nice and straight, so it goes into the slot and fits nice and flush, what I've done is to give myself a guide from the old one. I've actually double-sided the two together so that I can put them into the vise without having to worry about whether they're lined up. And I'm going to drop them right down into the vise so it's got lots of grip on them. And then again just get pretty close with the file. Now, in all honesty, I could do some of this stuff on the belt sander, but I generally don't, because with things like this, you're just more likely to go too far on the belt sander and then also possibly damage the original one, which then robs you of your template. Though if you're careful, you can. The light in my workshop over in that corner there isn't as good as it could be. I haven't yet gone over to LEDs in that corner. I have over my main benches. Had I done so, then maybe that would be a little bit easier, because as I'm getting older, I won't say my eyesight's deteriorating particularly quickly, but I do find that I need more light, and that has become a bit of an issue, if I'm completely honest. That's almost there. that straight. Looks pretty straight. And you know you've got it straight because you'll just bite, I think, into that, and you can see I've just got a slight touch on that other way. And that'll be fine, it'll just bite the surface of the other one. That's all right, okay? And I'm just going to swing it round and do the same thing the other way up. Okay, so you can see I've filed the sides down to match, and I've just dropped that into the slot, and I can run my hand along there, and that's good. That's smooth. And actually, what I did notice after I started to look at this, there is a little bit of an angle, so the nut has to flare very, very slightly. I've just added that to the lower part of the nut, and that's fine. It fits in there perfectly well. So you see I've left the strings there. The reason I've left the strings on the ukulele is simply because I don't want to mess up a new set of strings, keep taking them in and out of the slots after I put the slots in. So next thing I'm going to do is put the slots into the places that I marked. So back into the vise, tightened up, we can see our little marks that we put in there. Now we know our sizes on the ukulele are kind of like the middle 4 strings on a light set of guitars or guitar strings. So 12, because it's, and these are our nut slotting files, 12, what would be 12, 17, yeah, so that's 12, 16, we'll just rock that file a little bit to open that up, 24, 32, so 2 files will do it. So let's just put a nice clean slot. I'm just going to put them in line backwards a little bit. Now, that's not going to be deep enough by a long way. Doesn't matter. I just want that slot so that it will hold the string on the instrument. And then we'll do the 16. Put it in level, then tilt it backwards. Because we just want to make sure that everything's nicely lined up, and then we can get the slots to the right depth. 26 on top. Get that in there. So a little test fitting, because now we've got our strings on top just to give us a little bit of tension, hold it in place, and you can see now how far too high the nut is. It gives us a rough idea of where we need to go to. Now what I can do here is I can actually mark on here with a pencil almost how deep those slots have got to be, but actually I don't tend to do that. I can see what I need to do and see how far I need to go down, and it's quite a distance yet. So, and you can see that the nut's not going anywhere. It's nice and tight under its own tension because the slot that it's laid into is nice and tight to the size of the nut. So it's going to give me some room to work. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do one at a time by removing one string. And this is going to be a bit of an awkward angle for me. So I won't be able to show you the entire process because of where the camera is. But basically what I'm going to do now is just lift that one string out the way. I'm going to take my file, okay, and I'm going to use, that's 32 there. I'm now going to start using the pressure that the other strings are using to hold it in to just get that to the right place. Okay, so as you can see, we have what looks like a working nut. It's not glued in yet, and I'll show you why in a moment. You can see there's plenty of clearance for the first fret. Probably just a tiny little bit too much, which is what we want at this point. Now we're going to finish the nut, because although the nut's a good working nut, it's rough on the surface and it needs shaping up and making a perfect final fit. Okay, now the slots are a bit too deep, so we're actually going to take some off the top, because what we want is a slot that is almost semicircular, not much more than that. We don't need any more depth. And we're going to just go back to rounding those corners as well, because obviously we squared them up a little bit when we just reduced the width of the nut, and we haven't gone back to those really and cleaned them up properly. Drop the shape of the nut so that it kind of matches the angle of the descent of the string across onto the headstock area. So we want the top of the nut to follow the run of the slot. We don't just want the job to be functionally brilliant, okay? And obviously the job will be functionally great, you know, it's going to solve the problem that the player had. What we really want is for the job to look nice as well. So what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to try and round just a little bit more at the back. And this again, this is more aesthetics than feel, because you won't feel this part of the nut on your hand. But we want to get that nice and smooth. So all I'm doing here is just really taking any sharp edges off. Sorry, you probably can't see that very well, and the light is probably not in the right place. Okay, and that looks really nice. I'm just going to take that to the back of there a little bit, polish that up too. I can't see what the camera can see, unfortunately, so I may be slipping about all over the place, might be making it difficult for you to see things. Sorry about that. Okay, we've got a few little marks in the back of there. They're just machining marks where I've used the belt sander. Just want to try and get rid of all of that if we can, without making the nut loose in the slot. Okay, again you can see I've left the strings on. The strings are our friend. This is the nut, okay, and this is what we're going to glue it on with. Now, I know some people think of super glue as being, I don't know, something you should never put near a guitar, and I can understand why, but you use it in very, very small amounts and only on the smooth surfaces. It's a very, very good and effective glue, and you can see I'm going to put a dab there and a dab there, and that is all I'm going to do, okay, because we don't need a lot to hold it in. So the beautiful thing about super glue is that it is brittle, and the fact that it's brittle actually helps us. Okay, and that's in the right place, and all we're going to do now is just flick the strings on top of it, just put a little tension. I'm not a big fan of this particular Loctite, it's just a little bit too runny, but we're okay. What I'm going to do is just gently put a little bit of tension on there while I'm holding that, because it takes, although it seems to go dry very, very quickly, I always just like to leave it, go and have a cup of tea. This is the ideal moment in the process. Okay, so here it is, it's finished. It's not probably quite in the correct tuning yet, but you can see it's you can hear there's no problem now with that string grounding out against that first fret, which is what the initial problem was, and the nut is nicely in place with no gaps anywhere. You can see, perfectly good job, and that's that.